All right, so welcome back to another episode of Fast Casual Nation, the podcast. We are talking about all things fast casual and kind of the growth elements that is happening in fast casual across the globe. And today we've got a Canadian restaurant brand that will be breaking down why they are growing in the Great White North. So I've got with me Anthony Green, who is the CEO and co-founder of Greenhouse. Great to have you on the show. Anthony, thanks for stopping.
Hey, thanks for inviting me over, Paul.
Yeah. Let's get into, for our viewers and listeners, maybe they haven't heard of Greenhouse. I got a chance to meet your marketing director and partner there last year when I was in Toronto and was very impressed. Stopped into one of your spots and really liked what you guys were doing. Tell us a little bit about the brand and how you guys got started.
Yeah, sure. So beginning of 2014, we launched with in a little coach house, out of a little coach house in downtown Toronto. A lot of the initial branding sort of came out of that little 400 square foot shop. We were selling healthy beverages from cold pressed juices to non-dairy milks, booster shots. Quite quickly realized how productive we could make a small fridge and smoothie bar, and from there we looked to expand. We quickly centralized production of those beverages into a little downtown commissary, and looked to sort of broaden our small footprint concept across the city. We're now at a little over a dozen stores, and with a direct-to-consumer business as well. And then about two and a half years ago, we commissioned a much more state-of-the-art manufacturing facility just on the outskirts of Toronto, which sort of effectively completed our transformation from being solely a fast casual concept to more of an omni-channel CPG business.
Right.
With a fair amount of growth now being derived from wholesale.
Interesting. So in the plans of building the brand, was a CPG model in the original blueprint for what you guys were looking to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the very concept of, I was backing up. I was living in Los Angeles at the time, actually, when I started Greenhouse. Originally from Toronto, but at the time seeing this sort of new wave of what juice bars were looking like, and cold pressed juice being one of them, and it was sort of an odd thing, and sort of it was this hybrid CPG product that was being made on premise, but was already made and could be grabbed and go, as opposed to sort of made on order. So
right.
We were, I guess in hindsight, we were a CPG brand from the outset, or a hybrid CPG brand from the outset, but there wasn't, wholesale was not a priority of ours for the first couple of years.
Gotcha.
And in the first couple of years, our shelf life was only about a few days. So really broad, any sort of broad wholesale distribution just wasn't feasible.
Yeah. With all right, so in the beginning, when you guys were producing kind of on the local level, were most of your, I guess, test markets still occurring at the retail front? So you were learning from customers as you were selling the product?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, and until quite recently, to be honest, I mean, it's really only in the last year and a half. We're almost 6 years old now, and really only in the last year and a half, 2 years has wholesale become a much more material part of our business. But we have allowed, through that time, that there are very few CPG brands out there that own a material part of their consumer base, and that's a really valuable, right? Is to get to own that relationship, effectively using our retail shops as a sort of an innovation sandbox, if you will.
Right.
A lot of our products first come out at our stores. We have our most diehard customers there, and it's always a challenge trying to keep that special when all of a sudden your products are available in many more places. And so, we try to really treat our retail customers the best with access to the newest products ahead of the rest of the market.
I like that. That's cool. So there's still some value benefits for people to jump into the retail shops. Obviously, for access point, it's almost like a direct-to-consumer, which, I hear more and more experts today, especially with, all the vehicles that we have as companies today from a digital standpoint, direct to consumer is really a very powerful point. But I love what you said, which is that CPG brands kind of lose that connectivity to their customer, and that is so true. And we see so many manufacturers that really don't even know who their customer base is. So the fact that you guys are kind of building on both ends is, I think, a really good strategy. Excellent to do that. How many, you still have several units though, several retail fronts, correct?
Yeah, we have a little over a dozen retail units, and they're all within the Greater Toronto area.
Right.
Now we are shipping our product coast to coast across Canada. So over several thousand miles across the country, and so it's a unique thing now developing new markets without that bricks and mortar presence, and we're still getting a hang of it. But I'd say in not so long, we will be opening up our first store in outside of Toronto to augment that sort of that ecosystem of really driving trial, using effectively our store as at once as a 3D billboard, as much as a hub for our direct to consumer business, i.e. our online home delivery business. Mm-hmm. So it's certainly it's an evolving business model, and to your point earlier, it was not what we saw in the outset when we first envisioned Greenhouse. Yeah. But as we know, things are changing very quickly.
Yeah, and this is a concept that I believe is something that a few fast casual concepts can pull off, and that is creating these lifestyle brands that kind of transcend beyond the product and beyond the retail facility. Sweet Green has tried to do it here in the United States. Obviously, they moved their headquarters from DC over to Los Angeles, I believe, so they could get a better pulse on the California market, which I believe is where they're going to try to transition into more of a lifestyle brand, meaning other products, maybe other services, things of that nature. When you look at the growth of healthy eating, at least here in the US, we're seeing a lot of double-digit growth in terms of frequency in healthy eating concepts, people going to them. And we're seeing very similar tracks like this in the Canadian data that we're tracking. Why do you feel like that we've seen this massive transition in just the last 5 years towards healthy eating?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt that consumers are driving that, and I think it's a broadening awareness about what we're putting into our bodies, and the inextricable link between health and diet becoming more and more understood. So I think. I think it's super exciting because I think by and large populations North America are becoming are putting health first and doing so with their diets.
Excellent. Cool. Mm-hmm. Well, and I think the key is as brands start to fill those spots of demand, we're starting to see a lot more concepts develop here in the U.S. It's probably one of the fastest growth categories, being healthy, fast casual. I haven't seen as many in Canada yet. We are still seeing kind of the tried and true segment leaders in Canada opening up. But I definitely see it as a potential future for sure. Let's get into your subscription and delivery model of your products and your goods. How did that start, and what does it take to run something like that?
It's a great question. We got started with this fairly early, so we were probably about 6 or 8 months into having launched Greenhouse. And once we centralized production, so we were basically making sort of almost a bakery model. Overnight, we were making our juices and nut milks, and then we were sending them to our shop. So we already had to invest in a refrigerated truck. So we had the initial infrastructure there, and basically we would divert our truck after it would drop off at our shop. That day's production, it would then go to sort of a modern day milkman model, and basically leave product on people's doorsteps. And because of what was really neat, just by virtue of the calendar, the schedule that we were running, and that we were running through the night, we were able to take deliveries, or we were rather able to take orders up until about midnight, and then we'd shut down the ordering for that day. But people would effectively wake up with the product on their doorstep.
Wow.
And so, this was 2014. So we were beating Amazon Prime in turnaround at that, more than 5 years ago, which was pretty cool. A very, caveat, big caution there is that it is hard to scale that. Obviously, we have
sure,
and so. As of this week, actually, for the first time, we're now all across Southern Ontario with that model, albeit not the we still do midnight. You wake up the next morning across Toronto. We've done something a little bit longer turnaround across Southern Ontario, but we are turning this quick turnaround delivery on in Vancouver. Several thousand miles away from Toronto. So
that's cool.
We're basically leveraging the supply chain we've had to build in order to get to our wholesale customers out west, and then and leveraging the third-party warehouse, and then owning the last mile delivery. So again, we're back to one truck in a new city, and seeing how that will go.
Yeah, interesting. I like the terminology you're using, direct to consumer, last mile. Those are the things that, for brands in the future, especially if you take a look at, let's just take a look at Apple, they've been able to control the retail experience, which, as you kind of mentioned, is that in real life digital experience that becomes a billboard as well for the brand. So, and very few fast casuals have been able to kind of transcend into that area. So I think you guys are kind of on the forefront here. So kudos to what you're doing. When you look at the Canadian market, there has been some recent growth and expansion in the number of fast casual brands being developed in Canada. Why do you feel like Canada is just now starting to feel this potential growth sector really exploding, and the brands are starting to fill in the spots? What do you think the growth is caused by?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's anything necessarily more unique from what you'd be seeing in the United States. I think the driving forces are the same as we discussed before. Consumer awareness around wanting. Millennial, obviously growing millennial population who has aspirations to be healthy, but want it quick. Fast casual, ticks all those boxes, and so I think I don't think things are any different here in Canada. Certainly trends migrate up here a little bit slower than like in cities like New York or Los Angeles. So I think it's just that, and obviously, the restaurant market, as you suggested earlier, here is a little bit more consolidated. You have a number of incumbents, and they do try to jump onto these trends as quickly as they can as well. So you have the A&Ws and Tim Hortons of the world, quickly getting onto Beyond Meat, etc.
For sure. No, it's an interesting market, Canada. We just did a full study on the Canadian restaurant market in terms of restaurant visits, heavy growth sectors, the concentrated areas of diners in the provinces, et cetera. And I was kind of intrigued by some of the data that was being done. We kind of compared it to a report we did with a report that was done by American Express on similar elements around it. But it appears that as though Canada, though there has been some slowing transaction counts, meaning people eating out, we are seeing more concentrated efforts in some of the brands that are doing really well, which usually starts to kind of create a shakeout for the business. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of moves forward. When you look at building Greenhouse, and this is kind of one of those things that for fast casual entrepreneurs that are listening to this podcast or watching, what were some of the things that you really said, hey, these were kind of the hard things that we had to get over the hump on in terms of building our brand when we got started? Because you're still fairly young.
Yeah, it's it's a good question. We are fairly young. I think as anyone will attest in startup life, a month can feel like a year.
Yes.
So a lot can happen, and so even though we are still quite young, it does feel like ages ago. So bear with me as I try to recall those early days. But I think in the early days we were super lucky in that we started with as a number of founders. This was all sort of a side hustle of ours,
right?
And we. But we all sort of started in a neighborhood that we had grown up in, and while were living elsewhere, we had a whole amount of social capital, so that on day one when we opened up our doors, we sold out in like an hour, and that was just friends and family being kind to us. And then, as things evolved, we were super lucky at the time as well that Instagram was kind of at its apex,
Right.
and not yet giving a hard time to brands and companies. It was sort of agnostic to whatever account you had, so you didn't have algorithmic headwinds as a company, and we had a lot of, because we had a really pretty product to photograph.
Right.
We had that was sort of electronic word of mouth, sort of throwing gasoline, if you will, on like, hey, this is a really neat product. Check it out. And at the time, we were kind of first to market with a product like this in Toronto. Again, speaking to what we were discussing before, is we were a good couple of years behind what I was living in. As I mentioned, I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and we were a good couple of years behind what was going on in Los Angeles.
Interesting.
But in Toronto, it was new, and so that was, so timing was really critical for us. I'm not gonna so timing and having social capital just in where we were starting, those were both things that we were really fortunate to have. I mean, to answer your question about obstacles that needed to get in the way, I'd say, it's a hard thing to talk about, to be honest, but it is, it's a double-edged sword starting with a bunch of founders, and equally, after a certain amount of time, the company reached a certain amount of success. When you have a bunch of founders, you inevitably, everyone has a different idea of what direction the company needs to go.
Sure.
So I'd say, probably one of the largest initial obstacles we had to get around was how that was, who was going to take on what, and who wanted to be a part of this for the long run. And so, I'd say, to entrepreneurs out there, I get this question a lot. I would just be really, I'd be really think twice about who you're getting into business with, because it really, I got into business with some old friends who I trust a lot, and still do, but maybe going into business with them wasn't what was best for the company itself. And
Right.
so I think that was my biggest takeaway in year one, was really I could have been more a little bit more judicious about how we set up the company and its partners.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. We had a podcast not too long ago where that very topic came up on the formation of companies in the early stages from a legal standpoint, making sure that you get all your ducks in a row when you have multiple founders, because exactly what you just explained is the number one thing that usually starts to cause companies to fail, which fortunately you guys were able to tread through that. Anthony, so I have a question for you in reference to obstacles, because obviously you, in essence, are a food service manufacturer, or a food manufacturer now, a beverage manufacturer. Mm-hmm. What kind of scenarios did you guys have to deal with in terms of certification, licensing, et cetera, like that, since you were producing a product not really cooked to order, but made, produced, bottled, and then in essence distributed? What kind of things were you running up against for that side of your business?
Yeah, it's a good question. Initially, when we just sort of centralized production, and again, these are rules in Canada, and then provincially in Ontario are probably urge your listeners to look at their local context. But where we are basically at the time, when we centralized production, because the production and because our shops, our little stores were owned, it was effectively there was nothing incremental that we needed to do around the regulatory piece.
Okay.
Then as we've expanded and we've started to sell wholesale, there's a whole number of considerations that needed to be taken, particularly when we started going out of province. And that's really embodied when you look at sort of at our packaging. If one were to go onto our Instagram and look at our original packaging maybe 5 years ago to our packaging today, it was an awesome experiment in minimalism back in 2014.
Right.
But sure enough, things like here in Canada, our labels all have to be bilingual, so they're English and French. Their barcode, the nutritional facts. These are all things that we kind of did away with. So initially, we now have more of a conventional looking CPG product.
Right.
But yeah, back then we were able to get away with, because we were kind of our own ecosystem where we owned the commissary, the delivery to the shops and the shops themselves. That was a regulatory loophole, if you will. Now we're governed by the federal government and what's known as the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and so our facility has what's called the HACCP program, which is basically around hazard mitigation, and then there's a third-party auditing company called, or a governing body called SQF, which is a GFSI certification, and that makes certain that it gives confidence to all of our wholesale customers that we are manufacturing at the highest of standards to mitigate any quality and safety risks.
Yeah, food safety issues with that obviously is a major scenario. So you made that transition, and it sounds like that worked really well for the wholesale side of it. I'm kind of curious, have you looked at moving in for the retail side of your business? Have you looked into moving into any kind of packaged food products there as opposed to just beverage only?
Yeah, it's a good question. We have been experimenting for the last year and a half or so with some prepackaged salads and pre-made sandwiches as well that we grill up on a panini press. I think that's
right.
Certainly that currently that offering is in about half of our stores, and
okay.
It's not a supply chain it's not an operations function that we've yet optimized, but it's having growing importance. So
right. Yeah.
So certainly I would say, as we look to develop our retail 2.0 model for new cities across Canada, it will incorporate a broader food offering aside from the beverage offering.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, all right. So looking forward now, let's kind of wrap up the questions here. But looking forward into 2020, what are some of the trends that you guys are tracking there in Canada in terms of whether it's food service, beverage, things you're preparing for as the business grows?
Yeah, for sure. So, obviously we're super excited to see plant-based wellness being a top trending movement right now, and we don't. I don't necessarily see, how that. Perhaps the vernacular around it will change, but I don't see that as going anywhere. I think it's somewhat of it's rooted in somewhat of an existential need for us and our planet to be moving more plants to the center of our plate, more plants more often, and so I think I'm super excited to see that movement here and now. And then, in Canada, I don't know if you guys have down south have seen this yet, but obviously the Canadian cannabis market is sort of launching now into Cannabis 2.0. Cannabis 2.0 is effectively CPG products,
right?
And so what we're as a plant-based health and wellness company called Greenhouse, we're super interested in non-psychoactive cannabinoids. So the parts of the plant, a lot of it can be actually extracted from hemp, but has nothing to do with the sort of the recreational side of things and intoxication, but has much more to do with a lot of the burgeoning research now coming out of universities that are showing a plethora of health-giving use cases for these cannabinoids in various use, in various combinations. So we're really excited about that. We're actually amidst bringing online a third line at our facility in a sort of a separate offshoot facility of ours, and excited about that will be we will be allowed to manufacture cannabis beverages on that line, and with that as well, we're launching a sister brand as well. Perhaps I should say a brother brand, because the brand's called Herbert, and you can check it out at herbertlabs.com.
Excellent.
And super excited about that.
Yeah, very cool. Well, it sounds like you guys are moving in the right direction at the right time with all the tools of the trade. And I was an interesting note that you had in terms of when you launched and your connectivity to Instagram. I think now we're going to be seeing some new brands start to leverage, what's happening over on TikTok in almost the same format.
Sure.
And being able to open up into new markets and expose themselves to some of the, the Gen Z audiences. It's growing. Anthony, it's been great picking your brain here. We definitely want to maybe get you guys back on the show as you guys continue to grow there in Canada. So thanks for stopping in on the podcast today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. So for all of you listening in, make sure and subscribe to us on iTunes or maybe on Spotify. Make sure and tag us. If you have a great guest or someone that you'd like to have on the show, just shoot us a note to producer@foodabletv.com. And of course, make sure and leave a rating on iTunes. It's one of the best ways we get feedback from our audience, and it's a great tool for us to understand what's working and what's not working. And of course, you can always reach me over on Twitter @Paul Barron. We will catch you next time right here on the Fast Casual Nation podcast.